Welcome to today's sew along. Today we will be sewing the Muna and Broad Banksia Bralette together. So I have another video about customizing the amount of support you wish to have for your bralette. And today I have chosen to line the front with power mesh, use the support slings, but I'm not lining the back. This is the B cup, so it is has a little less volume through the bust. But if you're a D cup, then you should select the other front and support slings and back. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stay stitch this lining to the front and the back if you're using it. So this is the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm just going to lay my power mesh on top of it like that. I'm going to pin it onto the edges now, just to hold it in place. Many stretch fabrics have the tendency to roll up, and the bamboo spandex I'm using is no exception. So that's why it's good to just pop a few pins in there just to keep things unrolled. When you're sewing, if you have a walking foot for your machine, then that can be really helpful. I don't actually have a walking foot for this sewing machine that I'm going to be using, so I'm not going to use a walking foot, but that's fine. Once I get these stay stitched together, it will stay unrolled quite a bit better. Okay, so I'll keep unrolling that bottom edge as I go while I am stay stitching. I'm going to use a narrow zigzag and I'm going to stay stitch right along the edge, matching these edges together so they sit flat. If you've had a bit of trouble cutting out, say the power mesh is quite hard to cut out accurately, and say the power mesh is much smaller, don't like stretch it too much to fit, or it can actually deform the shape of the bralette. So you're better off to actually just trim that bit away and keep this part really flat. So I'm going to use this narrow zigzag right along the edge. Please don't use your serger or overlocker at this point, because it will actually be too wide to deal with when we go to apply the fold over elastic. So whichever kind of lining you're using, stay stitch it onto the front, and if you're using it on the back, stay stitch it onto the back as well. And then I'll be back to show you the next step. Right, so I have stay stitched that on. I'm going to flip it to the wrong side now. You can see there's a little bit here where it didn't want to meet. That's okay. It's not sitting entirely flat, but again, it's not a big deal. I'm going to take my sling pieces now. So just be careful when you lay your sling pieces on that you're laying them on correctly. Sometimes this side seam bit can look a little bit like it's supposed to go onto the strap. Just make sure you don't do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stay stitch the slings from the side seam, up around the armhole, around the neckline, and down the other side seam. You can do this one at a time. It can be easier to do that. Be aware that at one point it will actually drop away from the neckline. If I place these pattern pieces on top of each other, you'll see that the sling finishes a little bit before the center front and then it slopes down. So the point that it stops matching with the neckline is the point where you'll stop sewing. About there. The other thing you'll notice is these side seams are the side seams of the sling are much more angled than the side seams of the front piece, and that's intentional. So when you get there, I'd like you to follow the armhole, matching that really closely, the neckline and the armhole matching it really closely, and then when you get to this side seam, when you pivot, you're going to pull this over and match it. So that's putting a little bit of extra tension. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Okay, I've sewn the top edge of the sling onto my bralette, and now I need to sew the lower edge. Now, when you pull the sling down to match the lower edge of the front will bunch up, and that's because the slings are shorter than the front, and that's on purpose. So that we get a little bit more support out of those slings, just to tighten them up a bit. I'm just gonna clip these into place. This notch here matches the center front of the bralette, and the notches should match each other. Okay, now we're going to stay stitch these parts of the side seams, the lower edge, and the other part of the side seam. Okay, there we go. Slings are in place, and the front is a little bit bunched up, and that's good. I'm going to lay my back piece on right sides together. Now, if you've lined this with power net, then you'll have a power net side up. We're going to sew the side seams and the shoulder seams together. So you can pin if you like. All the seams, and there aren't that many actually, but all of the seams in this pattern are 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. So you can either sew these seams using the same narrow zigzag that you have been stay stitching with, or you can use your serger at this point. You're finally allowed. Okay, so sew the side seams and the shoulder seams. Right. Starting to get something that looks a little bit like a bralette now. So front and a back. Okay. Next we're going to look at the band. So mine's rolling up into a terrible tube. That's just kind of the way it is. So I'm going to unroll it, place it right sides together. This bit, again, you can't use your serger for. You're going to use that narrow zigzag. Oh, really doesn't want to unroll on me. I'm just going to pop a pin this way. Unroll it. Try and unroll it at least. There we go. Okay. Okay, so we're going to do a narrow zigzag to half close this seam. So we're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, excuse me, a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the edge to the middle, and then we're going to leave this part open, and then we're going to sew just, you know, a centimeter or so. So I don't know what that is, 5/8 of an inch, even less at this end. So we're just going to sew basically a 1/4 inch seam with a gap in it. So we're going to sew that, and then I'll be back. So I've sewn that like this. My machine got a bit angry at me. Didn't want to feed properly, but that's okay. I'm going to open it out flat, and I'm just going to press those seams to one side. And I'm also going to press the whole thing in half, unrolling as best I can. Okay, so I've done my best at pressing that. It wasn't really being very nice, but that's okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my bralette right way round. Okay. Now we're going to put the band on, and then it's going to flip down. And we want to flip it down so that the gap is on the inside. So right now the gap is on the outside when I flip it down. So I want to make sure that I pin it on so the gap, pin it on, that's right. So the gap is going to be on the inside. And you can just check that. So I'm going to start by matching my notches to the side seams, moving my side seams towards the back, like you don't have to press them, but if I were going to press them, I would press them to the back. And then the same on the other side. If I didn't, like I just found then I hadn't pressed it exactly in half, I'm just aligning those edges a little bit better. It's sometimes easier to do. And then I'm just going to actually pull the bralette through there, like that. Okay, now there shouldn't be any ease whatsoever. So you'll just be pinning this band onto the bottom of the bralette with no ease. Now, because of the rolling issue that I'm having, like it depends on your fabric. I find that, so this is bamboo spandex. I find it's pretty much the worst offender for the rolling. I don't know, maybe you've seen worse, but anyway, I find that bamboo spandex is pretty bad. So I'm going to put quite a lot of pins in because I don't want it to roll down to the point where I'm not catching it properly when I sew my seam, which is really, honestly, that's a real pain if that happens. So you can see here, like if I were to sew that without pinning it more, like I'm asking for trouble. Okay, it's going to be easier on the front because it's sitting so flat because of that stay stitching and all the power mesh and everything. So I guess if you'd done power mesh on the back, you'd be in a better position than me. Okay, just gonna check. So I'm going to sew this on all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can either use your serger, just don't run over the pins, or you can use your narrow zigzag that we've been using so far on our machine. Well, we're starting to get something that looks a little bit like a bralette now. A lot like a bralette. I've got my elastic here. This one's 1 1/4 inches. You can use 1 1/2 inch if you use the wider band. This is the smallest size, so I just think it's proportionally looks a bit nicer, but whatever you have on hand is good. I'm also going to thread it into my casing. When you measure your band elastic, you want it to be really snug around your rib cage. So for myself, that means about 2 inches smaller than my actual band measurement, but I just arrived at that number because that's what I tried, and it like I measured it after I tried it on around my body, and that seemed about right. So yeah, the best thing is just to try it on. I've added about 1/2 inch just for overlapping. Okay, just easing it in. Try not to, make sure that you don't like suck the the end in, and just also that you don't have any twists in the elastic. Okay. You'll overlap these ends just by the 1/2 inch and zigzag here. Just back and forth a few times, I like to do it. Right, that elastic is in. You'll notice there's still a gap here. I leave that open, and that's so that I can change the elastic out if it perishes, or if I need to change my band size, if I change size at all, or if it's just not comfortable at the size that I chose. So I leave that open, and it doesn't fray or anything, so it's fine. At this point, if you didn't use the power mesh on the back, I would stay stitch around the neckline, the back neckline, and the armhole. So anywhere you haven't stay stitched, go ahead and do that. The next step is to try the bralette on very, very gently. So the reason for the gentleness is because the edges aren't finished and they can stretch out of shape pretty badly. And we don't want that to happen. We want to keep it nice and unstretched. So you'll put it on. It is normal to have a bit of gaping here. If you can imagine there's something round in there. Okay, without elastic to pull this in, it's going to gape out a bit. So some gaping is fine. At this point, you might decide you want to take in the side seams just a little bit. You could do that. You could take up the shoulder seams a little bit. It's up to you. So just decide and kind of assess what's going on there. Try not to take it on and off a bunch of times, and also don't wear it like that. So if it's the most comfortable bralette you've ever worn and you just like want to leave it on, you might be sorry later. So Try it on, make any alterations you need to make, and then we're going to put the fold over elastic on and I will show you how that goes over at the machine. So here I am at my machine and I have my fold over elastic. This one has got a shiny side and it's got a matte side, and I prefer the matte side on the outside, to be honest. That's a personal preference thing. I think it's softer, but it doesn't really matter. I've just decided that that's the right side for me. I will say that I don't think that the method where you make a loop and then kind of ease it in, pin it and ease it in, that never works for me. I always end up with puckers, and it gives me the same sort of aggravation as sewing a t-shirt neckband on. Maybe some of you are really good at that, but I find that a difficult thing to do. Anyway, what I like about this technique is you can customize the amount of stretch you give the elastic as you go and for the area. So I'm pretty experienced about putting fold over elastic on now, and so I will customize the amount of ease. So for example, on the front of the armhole, I always stretch it a bit more because I really want it to pull in that front armhole edge to pull in some of the fullness that we have. Whereas on the back armhole, I don't put as much stretch on because I don't want it to dig into the back of the person's arm. So these are just like micro adjustments I can do. Obviously, if this is your first time sewing fold over elastic on, don't worry about it. Just do what you can. It takes practice, and I don't really have like a magic solution, but that's all I can say. So I'm just going to start off by folding it over. Oh, see how there's a little ear here? I'm just gonna snip that off. So I don't use pins anywhere except for right now. So right at this beginning bit, I pop a pin in just to hold it while I get it under the presser foot. I've got a wide zigzag of a width of 5 and a stitch length of about 2.5. I'm gonna pull that pin out now. I'm just gonna make the camera focus there. Okay. So the first few stitches, so I'm just folding it over here with no ease. The first few stitches, I don't do any stretching. I just want to anchor it. So I'm gonna just back tack there and just get going. Okay, now I'm anchored, and so I've got something to pull against. If I had a machine that had the ability to finish with the needle either in the downwards or the up position, like computerized machines do, then I would select it to finish in the down position. Mine doesn't do that, so we'll just pretend it's finished in the downwards position, and that's just so it's holding it. What I see quite often is people folding it over with no ease and then stretching it. And that's not going to add any ease in because you're stretching both things the same amount, both the fabric and the elastic the same amount. So I like to hold the fabric in my left hand and my elastic in my right hand. I'm going to give the elastic a bit of a yank and just match that edge into that center line, fold it over, keeping the tension on it. Okay, so if I were to release the tension, you would see there'd be puckers in the fabric and the elastic would be relaxed. I'm going to do that again. So my thumbs are even. I'm pulling back on the elastic a bit, tucking the fabric in, folding it over, and I'm just holding it with that tension there just enough so the fabric is smooth. It helps me if I pull a little bit gently from behind. I'm just going to sew that short bit. Okay, then we do the next section. Okay, I've got my thumbs even. I'm going to pull a little bit on the elastic, holding it taut. Remember, you can do the test where you release the elastic and you'll see the fabric pucker. and I'm pulling from behind with my left hand as I sew. Okay, giving a little pull. This is the back side, so I'm not putting much ease in there. Okay, pulling the elastic, not the fabric. Okay, coming over the shoulder seam now. So again, pull the elastic, not the fabric. Place the fabric in there, fold it over, and hold it firmly. Okay, I'm about a little bit above even with the neckline, so I'm going to start putting my hand actually up through the inside here. I'm going to start giving it a little bit more stretch, just a bit more. It's just something you need to get a feel for. Okay, you can see I'm coming round to the beginning again. Just going to clip these threads off now. Okay, so to deal with this overlapping, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap it. So I'm going to just make sure that I'm folding this over with a little bit more generosity, just to make sure there's no, like I don't want this bit, this little ear to stick out. I want that to be inside, if I can possibly help it. So at this point, I'm so close, I don't really need to do too much easing. So I'm going to make sure that I go past this point, the overlap point. A back tack. Okay, at this point I am not going to cut the elastic. Okay, I'm now going to change to a bar tack. So that's about a width of 2, and for me it's just over a half turn of the stitch length dial. And I'm just going to do a bar tack. Your machine might have a bar tack built in, lucky you. And then cut the threads. Okay. Now at this point, oops, my bar tack isn't quite as long as I'd like it to be, but hopefully yours will be. Now I've clipped that elastic off. So that's the finish. Now you'll do that on both arms and on the neckline as well. I'm going to sew those. I'm going to record myself sewing them, so if you just want to watch me sewing, that's fine. Just if you want to get more of a feeling for it. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this sew along, and I hope the bralette is as comfortable for you as it is for me. Okay, I'm doing the other side now. I'm being a bit clumsy here with my fingers. Here we go. Stretching the elastic but not the fabric. You see I've got a little bit of unevenness there. I'm just gonna trim that off. That's a better bar tack. I always agonize about where to start the neckline. I usually start it just behind the shoulder and a random spot. There's no real great spot to do it. This is the back neckline. As I go into this back deep scoop, put just a little bit more stretch on just so it doesn't gape. It shouldn't gape because it's under quite a bit of stretch, but it's just in case. I also do this back scoop in shorter sections, just to make sure I'm right up against that center. Rolling some more elastic there. It is a bit of a elastic hog. Just on this front neckline, just make sure that all those support slings are lying nice and flat for you. Just occurred to me that you might have a cover stitch machine. You might be doing it with a cover stitch machine, but I don't have one, so this is the way I'm doing it. Great, so that is all done. I hope that was helpful for you. I think it's always helpful to watch someone else doing something, so I hope the bralette is comfy for you, and have a great day.